name is Francis Mwesigye. I work for Uganda Development Bank as a chief economist and also director for economic research and knowledge management. UDB is a national DFI or development finance institution. Its sole purpose is to improve the quality of life of Ugandans. The core mandate is to provide financial and non-financial interventions, mainly to catalyze the private sector growth. Private sector also includes a bit of PPPs. I will not dwell much on UDB because that's not why I was called here. I was invited to speak about the cost of capital. Capital being one of the key factors of production. And I thought that to speak about capital, I should start by laying the structure of the financial industry and a bit provide the context. If you look overall, domestic credit is about 49.2 trillion Uganda shillings. If you disaggregate this by two, we have net credit to government of about 22.3 trillion and private sector credit of about 25.85 trillion. And so if you look at overall private credit, private sector credit constitutes about 53%. Now, this private sector credit as a percentage of GDP is 13%. Now, put it into context. America's GDP per capita, of course, have gone the extreme. As a, rather, private sector credit as a percentage of GDP is about 198%. China, 109%. Sub-Saharan Africa alone is about 33%. Our neighbors, Kenya, it's 33%. That is the ratio of private sector credit to GDP. And for Uganda, it's 13%. Rwanda, our neighbor, is 22%. I'm trying to put this into context. So when you speak about capital as a key factor of production, and this is how you compare to the rest of the world, you start poking some questions. And so let's continue. If we look at where this 25.3 trillion is coming from, which is private sector credit, 88% of this comes from commercial banks. UDB as a national development finance institution contributes 6.8%. Credit institutions provide 1.2%, microfinance institutions about 2%, and the rest about 1.7%. So again, this is the structure, commercial banks being the key source of this very small private sector credit. Where does it go? So you have it, this is the supply of it from these financial institutions. That's how small it is relative to the world and to the recommended optimal. But then let's go to where it goes. 12% of this goes to agriculture, of private sector credit. And when I speak about cost of capital and why it's high, it will also give us an idea as to why agriculture is one of the lists, rather of the sectors that takes list of private sector credit. Manufacturing takes about 12.7%, that's about 13%. Buildings, mortgages, construction, real estate takes about 20%. Personal and housing loans take about 24.8%, call it 25%. So essentially, you have 45% of your private sector credit going to buildings, mortgages, real estate, and personal loans. And you know why personal loans? These are mostly salary loans. So the risk premium, the risk component is now coming in. So you have it, it's already small, but the allocation, the deployment of this private sector credit is again biased towards more safer, either relatively safer sectors that are easy to appraise, real estate, mortgages, and so forth, where you have collateral, and less on some sectors such as agriculture. And as we discuss capital as a factor of production, let's not forget about the other factors of production, land being one of the key components. We talked about land as a key factor, but it also influences the direction of capital. When you have land tenure insecurity, with 80% of your land being under customary holding, some segments of society are not having rights to land, say women, youth, and so forth, it means you're also redirecting capital from them because they cannot secure their credit. Now, let me go to the causes of this high capital. So when you go to a commercial bank, and when they are getting to give you a loan, there is a reference rate. If, let's say, the tenor of that loan is short, let's call it 6 months, they will go by a 6-month TB rate. And I think for the latest auction, it was about 12.3%. So already the starting point is 12.3% of interest. If you're looking for long-term funding, I'll give an example of UDB. Recently, we considered going local to raise capital locally because it comes with advantages. One, there is no forex risk. When you borrow from abroad, that money comes here, there is a forex risk to it. So you might even bring it at a relatively lower rate, but when you factor in the forex risk, it balloons, and it's still unpredictable. So we said, okay, let's consider, we ran some models looking at raising money locally. Now, of course, when you go local, depending on where you want to get it from, the reference rate is a 10-year bond. And I think, again, for the recent auction, this was at 17.5. Or you can go for 20-year bond, which is again 17.95. So if you're looking at raising long-term funding, let's say for DFI like UDB, you want to supplement what you get from government, the only person willing to give it to you at the bare minimum is this risk-free rate of 17.5. But again, as UDB, I would say we don't fund real estate, so most of the sectors we do fund are risky. So the risk premium that comes on top of that will push this higher. And we lend, as a policy, we lend at 12%. So already the local option of raising these resources is out. So if you're talking about private sector credit, you're talking about cost of capital. You start from the bare minimums. Now, for the institutions that borrow even from abroad, we do that as UDB. Lines of credit, of course, government sometimes borrows sovereign borrowing and capitalizes us. But there's a SOFR rate, the benchmark rate, which is like our 10-year or so bond rate, which is of 4.26%. In dollar terms, you put it in Uganda shillings, it goes to about 8%. But this varies. We've called it a global rate. When you bring it home, that changes. The risk premium also varies across countries. Those who have been following Uganda last year was downgraded to a B from a B+ by Fitch. Now that comes, it has implications on the rate at which you can borrow. You cannot get from SOFR rate. Already you're starting from 4.26 plus that. So you again find that now through engagements, government engagements, you go for concessional or super concessional sources, which are from multilateral institutions that are willing to lend you at a lower rate because, of course, we have a government guarantee and the government, of course, based on the relationships. And that's how you try to mobilize concessional. Now, the question is, can we do something about this? And I would say yes, which is my last component of this submission. I can say yes. We can do something on the risk premium because and the cost of operation. Because the key driver, the ultimate cost that is passed on to the final beneficiary or consumer, it will be that benchmark rate plus the cost of administering that money and the cost and the risk premium. What can we do about the risk premium? It comes back to the preparedness, and that's why some of the banks direct this money to say real estate and some other sectors that are seemingly less risky. So this is where everyone, each one of us, is responsible. How can we reduce formalization? Is one of the key ways of reducing risk premium. When a bank is considering to give money to someone, there is what they call KYC. You want to know about that customer. Now, if it is informal, no records, no nothing, already they are starting from a risky point of view. You don't know them. So if they are formalized, they are keeping books of accounts, you can tell how their cash flows have been moving. It reduces, you factor that in. And that's why in the banking sector, you find some people called premium borrowers. Some might get their money at 16% and others are getting at 25%. Farmers get it at even much more higher rate. Because from the starting point, they are considered risky. Even when they are not risky, but there are no records to show that they are not risky. So we can do something about that. Number two, it is the cost of administration of this. Recently we innovated, we came up with an innovation to work with a fintech solution called Nsibuko, where loan appraisal, loan evaluation is done through a digital platform. There are inbuilt algorithms that you give data and it tells you how much the cap, how much one can borrow and at what rate. And so there are no people involved. It's so common that during the planting season, a farmer will come, he wants just 1 million or 500,000. I'm from Kabong. We didn't have branches. Again, I will be using an example of UDB. Driving to Kabongo to appraise that one project, an officer that sleeps there, normally they go as a team because they look at different components. You put in 3 million, but they want 500,000. So already that feeds into the risk, rather the cost of operation. So if you can innovate, and now I've seen commercial banks and other banks using these digital platforms, online banking, they can actually say, you can borrow up this much through the digital platform because they are looking at your transactions and they know that you qualify for this. So maybe we also, as a financial industry, need to innovate more and come up with such platforms that significantly reduce the cost of administering these loans so that what you add on that benchmark rate of 12% or 17% is relatively lower. So that's the much we can do, but still, even with all these interventions, it would mean that you're starting from a higher rate. Lastly, it is the government's role in this. So when we talk about development finance institutions, and we need development financing in this whole game, the percentage of development finance as a percentage of total credit or as a percentage of GDP currently is less than 1%. UDB alone, it's 0.83%. Our portfolio as a percentage of GDP. Now, we've done some studies. Unfortunately, I saw someone here, we happen to have attended some good training together, where they gave BNDES, National Bank of Brazil, as an example. Their percentage of private sector credit is about 25%. I said UDB alone, it is 6.8%, but their percentage of GDP is 15%. Now, if you combine UDC and UDB and other DFIs, we do not exceed, as a percentage of GDP, we don't exceed 1%. And then you want to categorize this economy of about 200 trillion. It is impossible. So development financing should be key and a key discussion in this whole agenda. And I'm really pleased to hear from NPA, Minister of Finance. Of course, we are a national bank owned fully by the Minister of Finance. There are these discussions. If we want development financing, for example, which offers equity as UDC to the key growth sectors, or UDB that provides debt and equity, you want them to transform this industry, you would really have to categorize them. And the discussion would be different, because the question would be, if government is borrowing to the tune of 22 trillion, where can they get money to categorize if they use that? There are other innovative options of categorizing development finance institutions and directing them to lend or issue equity at favorable terms or lend at favorable terms and to the key growth sectors, and that's key, rather than have 50% of your private sector credit or money going to some sectors that are probably not growth enhancing. It would be a different discussion that I probably can't go in today. With that, I would like to submit. Thank you.